Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nolan Colegrove, the District Ranger for Six Rivers National Forest. I have 3 districts, actually. 2 on the Six Rivers. One is the Lower Trinity, where this project is located, and the other one is the Orleans Ranger District. And I also have one that's on the Klamath National Forest, and that's the Yukonom Ranger District. So it's a combined unit. It's got about 600,000 acres or so. It's as big as some of the forests are across the country. You know, the acres aren't the impressive thing for me and the stuff that I have to deal with. It's the amount of people that I have to manage. The amount of people doubled up when these districts got combined, and that was one of the things I wanted to clarify for you, just so you can understand. I worked at HOOPA for about 25 years or so, and in 2009 I left and I came to the Forest Service. So you see some of the timelines that were proposed there. This project, TFPA for HOOPA, was proposed back in 2005. So I was there. I was working. I helped draft the letter that was the request. I worked with Sonia Temez and others in the region, and real closely with the district ranger at the time. So I was involved on that side. And coming to the Six Rivers, I was hired as the ranger for Orleans, which didn't have Lower Trinity, didn't have this piece of ground right here. But a couple of years later, I think it was about 2013, it got solidified. So it got the ranger districts got combined. So I inherited this district also. So I was working on the project as from the tribal side, and now I have the responsibility on the Forest Service side of managing this piece of ground. So it's a little bit unique for me to be in that position. I don't think a lot of folks, you know, across the country have been in that boat. I know a lot of Forest Service folks aren't, there's not a lot of tribal folks that work for the Forest Service outside of tribal relations. In tribal relations, there's a fair amount. Outside of it, it's mostly fire. In the regular portion of the Forest Service, there's not a lot, especially in the line officer slots. My boss, Merv George, is often talking to groups, and he shares that with people, that there's only 2 native line officers in the state of California, and they both work on the Six Rivers. That's him and I. So it's a little bit unique. So I give you that background because it kind of would help shed some light on the perspective that I come from. I kind of know the issue a little bit, and know the project to some degree. Being on the Forest Service side is probably more the things that I don't understand. That's a little bit more difficult to understand, all those processes and policies and how all the puzzle fits together. But we do make it work, and this project here is an example of that. I wanted to answer just a couple of questions before I started the presentation. One of them was, you know, the amount of time that we spend, and the question came from the back of the room. We spend probably about 10% of our time on this project, and it's not even on our program of work. So all your district rangers out there that are thinking about, you know this kind of project, it's not even on our plate yet, but we still spend a fair amount of time on it. It's coming up on our program of work in a couple of years for the next phase, and Leaf, you had asked about that, and so I'll talk a little bit about that. But we spend a fair amount of time on it. Andrew spends a lot of time looking for grant sources to fund this project, and he probably spends about 5 or 10% of his time on just doing that. So just to give you some perspective, and he had asked a question, so I wanted to make sure I answered that. So one of the key things to understand for both sides is this, like anything, is about relationships. And I'm going to kind of jump back and forth from my previous position and to where I'm at now. I spent a fair amount of time when I was a forest manager talking with the rangers, also with the tribal relations staff in the region, and the forest supervisor and specialists out in the field. And this all came about because you heard Kevin talk about the Meagrum fire. The Meagrum fire is about 140,000 acres, and it definitely threatened the reservation, and that was back in 1999. Prior to that, in 1997, there was a winter storm that went through. So if any of you know what happened in that part of the world, if you've been there, there was a storm that went through in this higher elevation part of this area. so between 5 and 6,500 feet elevation, 5,000, 6,500 feet elevation. It leveled some stands, and if you know the area, it's got a lot of true fir. True fir doesn't do good under stress. So if you get wind throw, if you get insects and that kind of stuff, true fir doesn't do very well. The lower elevations there have a lot of Doug fir and mixed hardwood, and they're a lot more resilient. But these stands that went through that storm, it leveled them. It looked like somebody took a lawnmower, a big lawnmower, 150, 200 foot tall trees, and just wiped them out and just made them just all jackstrawed all the way across the top of the hill slopes there. So that set up a bad condition later. And so it's not just the fires; it's the other conditions that are out there that make that threat, that create that hazard that's out there. And so those two things combined was a recipe for disaster, and that's really what happened when the Megram fire came through. It was a disaster. It blew up a lot of area that was important to the tribe. As Kevin mentioned, that area is a church to the tribe. So much like a Catholic would go to the cathedral, and other religions have places where they pray. Tribal people go out into the woods here and they pray. They go out there and gather foods. They go out and that's their medicine. They go out there and gather that. They worship out there in the woods. So it's not something that you would readily notice. There's not a big cross up there that you would see, that you would walk to. They're more subtle. They're little places. They're high peaks. They're points along a trail. And so, if you weren't from that sort of background, you would have a hard time seeing that. Archaeologists that are trained to look for that stuff have a hard time finding that. So for the regular person, it's even more difficult. And so that's, to the tribe though, those things are very important. And for other people that don't understand that, it's like you can't see it. So it's hard to grasp. It's hard to put your arms around to see why that's so important. But that is one of the reasons why that area is so critical to the Hoopa tribe. And you heard Kevin mention a couple of others, like the Karuk tribe. There are a couple of other sites up there that are shared. So it's the area is important to a number of people. I think the Hoopa tribe has about 3,000 people. The Karuk tribe has about 5,000 people or so. 4. And the Yuroks are somewhere in between. So there's a lot of people that depend on some of those areas up there. Not all of the 5,000, 10,000, or whatever that total might be. They're not all up there at once. And this is the spiritual people that go up there, but they're responsible for the spiritual well-being of the tribes, and so they need their areas. So that's why it's so important. So I wanted to share that background with you, because that's why the part of the Tribal Forest Protection Act was designed, was those threats from the outside that I seen you got 5 minutes. All right, I thought I just started. Kevin was right. I'd like to talk. Don't give me the mic anymore then. But anyways, that's part of the background behind the TFPA, was to protect tribal resources. And so there are a number of threats like wildfire, pest, drought, like we're seeing today, the climate change. But one of the things at the time was the lack of projects that the Forest Service was proposing to do any restoration. And that was a threat, because if you're not taking care of it and a fire comes through, and you've seen all the fires that Kevin had looked at, that was probably one of the key factors, because Forest Service, we weren't doing anything. And so so when I came over to the Forest Service side, now I have that, I own that, and now that's what we're doing. We're out there looking at it. If you know our regional forester, Randy Moore, I was sharing this with him. He came up in 2013 during a fire, and we were talking about this issue, and he said we were talking about, well, we're not able to get out there in front of this because we have all these. I was naming off all these things, and he said, well, it's your district. What are you going to do about it? And so that's straight talk from Randy, right? The folks in the room know Randy, know that's where he comes from. And so we've been looking actively at what we're going to do, and so that's kind of what we're up to. It's going to be on our program of work. I better start skipping down these slides. It's going to be on our program of work coming up here in 2017. But the understanding of it, if you're a Forest Service person and you don't know tribes to begin with, and so it's sort of this enigma that you don't have any background on. It could be a scary place. It could be a place that you don't want to go because you're not comfortable. And And that's some fear that you need to get over, because tribes, like Thora said earlier, they're following a lot of the same laws. All those hammer laws that apply on Forest Service land, like NEPA, the Clean Air, Clean Water, Historic Preservation Act, tribes are following those same ones. And in fact, tribes are probably doing more so in terms of ecological restoration than the Forest Service could dream of, because they're doing a lot of the things that are above and beyond what's in our forest plans. So if you compare a tribal plan to a Forest Service plan, there's a lot more protection for cultural species, which don't even show up on a sensitive species list that you look at in terms of when you're talking about a forest plan. So the tribes are automatically doing a lot more. And I know the Hoopa tribe was certified by Smartwood as a sustainable operation. It's the only one in the country that was certified under Smartwood guidelines under the Forest Stewardship Council as a sustainable operation. So not sustained yield, but sustainable operation. And so you could learn from tribes as well. And so getting over that enigma or thinking that there's a mystery and you don't understand them, that's a hurdle that you need to clear right off the bat. And the way to do that is communication. Build that relationship, communicate, work with each other. Come to an understanding, and that's why I put this slide up here, is come to an understanding, because you heard Kevin talk about our program of work process and the lack of resources that we have. Well, that's a similar story across the country for Forest Service, and similar to tribes. But the one thing that we came to a conclusion on, you heard Kevin mention wildlife. That's one of the resources that we don't have very much of on the forest. But if the tribe has that resource and we can work together on a project and be creative, do some creative, be innovative in the way that you do NEPA, that's another way to skin the cat. So it's another way to get the job done. And so tribes do have stuff to offer when they come to the table. I mentioned earlier that there is also the tribes come with, or the Forest Service, comes with luggage. So if you want to, get in bed, so to speak, with the Forest Service on a project, just bear in mind that public does change. That public definition of who you scope your projects to and that sort of stuff is different, and that is a significant difference in terms of the way tribes deal with stuff, because tribes get to define their own public in NEPA. And so the Forest Service doesn't. It's every American across the United States. So that's a big difference. So tribes need to be aware of that. Already talked a little bit about that. That was the actual letter that Kevin talked about. The project that we embarked on, Kev already mentioned that we have it got altered, and it's unfortunate that we have such restrictions in the wilderness area for taking care of it. And part of those the reasons that we want to conserve it are the same reason why it gets affected so much. I'm put that as lightly as I can. It gets affected so much by wildfire or other threats. And our own policies did as much to cause some of the damage that's happened in those areas as it has, even more so than it has helped. If you look across the areas where we do have large wildfires, outside of the wilderness, we've been pretty successful. We do pretty good outside of the wilderness because we have some roads and other places where we can take care of things. But just in general, in those wilderness areas where the mist tactics and other stuff are employed, we lose a lot of fires. Fires start in those areas. You heard Thora say earlier that they were first looking at the fires coming not from the WUI up, but from the wild areas down. That's the case here. That's really the case in those wilderness areas, because they get so big, then they come out of it, then we're managing them, then we're in the defensive mode trying to figure out what to do at that point. So that's just a little side note, but that changed the project area. This slide shows the roadside piece, and this slide it shows the adjustment and what we want to go to next. So this is what's on our program of work. Leaf, you had talked about what's next. This is where we're going next. Darren asked earlier to one of the speakers about, what's the scope of that question that you might, can you add more? So definitely, if the conditions change, you need to really look at making changes out there, because the conditions aren't static, especially in this area. If you go out there, walk around through the area, you'll see that the brush grows significantly every year. Even if you cut a trail out, it grows back. Snags come across that trail again. There's just it's not static, so it does change. Other things happen that you can take advantage of. We had a couple of the fires that were in the area, and I was saving that for the end, but I think my time is up, so I'm just going to skip forward to that point. Is one of the things that we did during those fire events was we took care of a couple of the treatments that we were proposing. It didn't turn out exactly the same, but in essence, we got some of that work done under managing a fire. So there are other opportunities that you can take advantage of as you're moving through the course of the year, course of the season, and whenever those different opportunities come up. As we all know, fire is doing the heavy lifting out there on the land. Everything that is really happening over a lot, if you look in this part of the world, the shape of the forest, the conditions, the forest type has all been shaped by wildfire lately. We have had not a very significant amount of effect out there in the last several years, just because things are changing on a large scale. So those things that we're talking about now in the Forest Service side of things, of increasing the pace and scale, and you heard Brian talk about that earlier, increasing the resiliency of the landscape to those threats like wildfire, and doing ecological restoration. All those things all fit in very well now with what we're doing. Sharing with you another project that we're working on up out of the mid-Klamath area, working with the Karoo tribe. We're looking at a project in that part of the world that's about 1 million acres, and it significantly addresses a lot of these issues. And so where the situation warrants and where it fits, that's what you need to look at. So, I say that because I wanted to leave you with, don't think that you're going to walk in the door of a tribal office, or if you're a tribe walking in the office of the Forest Service, that you're going to get one size fits all, because forests are different. Each forest supervisor is different the way they manage. Each different district ranger is different. Likewise, each one of the tribes have a different and unique perspective, and their needs are different. And so you can't have the same thing when you walk in the door to each one. So we just wanted to leave you with that. And it's I would say appreciate that diversity. And I think you will be pleasantly surprised at the help that you'll get from both sides. So with that, I'll entertain any questions. Kev, you can't ask any. Just kidding.
Any questions other than Kevin? No. Any questions?
Can you speak more about why this project wasn't included in the program of work?
So this year, or 2 years ago it had to be re-looked at in terms of the staleness of the NEPA, because the NEPA was done a few years ago and it was just a CE. So those things you have to re-look at. There are a number of other projects that rose to the priority list. Some weren't of our choice. They were mandated. There's travel analysis that is one of the things that you have to do. And so we have one of those projects, and it's been on our program of work for the last 10 years. So it's an EIS, I'll give you that, but it shouldn't take us that long. But nevertheless, that's one that is in front of this project. The TAP is another travel analysis on another district, is one of those things that we have to get done. And so there's those types of things. It's not because it's not a priority. It is a matter of timing politically, though, as well. We're not just doing this on our own, we're working with the tribe. And so if the tribe wants to say, yeah, and they came to the forest and said, we want to push this and push travel management off of the plate, they can have that conversation with the forest supervisor, and the forest supervisor would make that decision at that point in time. But if it's a regional forester saying, well, you need to finish travel management, then you need to finish travel management. It's kind of the gist of that. Does that answer your question?
Any other questions? Oh, there we go. Raise those hands high. I'm using my sight.
I was wondering, I might have missed something about the relocation of the wilderness boundary. What was the purpose and what was the process?
The purpose, can you turn that off? I wish it
to delete this?
I wish I could tell you what was in the minds of Congress when they do things, but I don't. I don't have that crystal ball, and that was a congressional act. It was handed to us, and so we went through there. So I don't know what the purpose is. And what was the second part?
The process by which the wilderness designation was done.
Similar to any other proposed legislation. So I don't actually recall who was the champion of the bill at the time, but I know probably some of the players.
I'm sorry, I don't think I was clear. I was asking why the boundary was moved.
So the Congress went through in 2006 and redrew a number of boundaries. This was one of them.
Okay, so it wasn't specifically for the project?
No. So maybe I should just say this. It was the wilderness was smaller before 2006 in that area, and the wilderness was larger after it became law, after that proposed wilderness bill became law. And it took a lot of the area that was proposed for treatment. That was in, it wasn't matrix land, but it didn't have a whole lot of other restrictions like it wasn't an adaptive management area, it wasn't LSR, late successional reserve, it wasn't in any of those that could be treated, but it took those and put those into the wilderness. And so it limits what you can do in there. Doesn't mean you can't do anything, it just means that it makes it tougher to do restoration work.
And is the wilderness designation part of the reason it's harder to get into that, or is that just an element of the geography?
The wilderness designation comes with a set of protection measures for the wilderness compared to what you can do on like matrix lands. Everybody know what matrix land is? Matrix land is areas where you can do a lot of different treatments that are under your forest plan that don't have a lot of restrictions. Not a spotted owl there, there's not a stream zone there's not a sacred site there. And you could propose fuels treatments in there if you wanted to. You can propose other treatments in there if you wanted to. But in the wilderness area, it says you cannot do a number of those. You can do restorative work in the wilderness. You could do to try to protect the area. So about as much as we could do is some hand work in there and do some prescribed fire. That will help. It's not gonna be a tool that is gonna be extremely effective. It's gonna take a little while. But that is a tool, and so you're not going to get the perfect set of tools in the toolbox like you do on other areas to work with. There was a question there.
Nolan, having a unique opportunity, I guess he helped draft this TFPA project, and then he went to the Forest Service and helped kind of push it on. So from, I guess, your unique standpoint, how do you see the collaboration of it from both entities?
Since I was on the beginning of that, I'd say it went great. No, just kidding. It definitely had some. It definitely had some of the things that I tried to address in these points that I made up here, so that. Just so you know, like Thora did, she tried to address some questions in her presentation. So I went home, I went to the motel at lunch and tried to rephrase some of the way that I did the presentation. And so some of those things that I wanted to share was from the questions, and hopefully we'll address this, is coming to a better understanding is probably one of those key things you want to do. Because when I first started, I didn't, talking to the district ranger, I didn't know what their processes were. I didn't understand why they took so long with NEPA. The Forest Service has, that's one of the things. It takes a long time for the federal agencies like the Forest Service to go through NEPA. Now, it's not the same everywhere. Some folks are pretty efficient, but they don't have the political pressure. So if you have a lot of political pressure, like you're going to get sued as soon as you make a decision, and that's kind of what the Six Rivers has lived with. You get sued every time you do a decision. And so understanding why it would take so long, because we wanted them to move faster. We wanted the Forest Service, when I was at the tribe, we wanted the Forest Service to move faster, but they couldn't because of that process, of the NEPA process. It wasn't that it wasn't a priority, it was that it took so long. So that just that understanding of knowing that was helpful. the understanding that the district ranger at the time had of why it was important to the tribe. Why do you want to do that? Why do you care so much about it? So we'd share what those tribal needs were in terms of the spiritual connectedness, the importance of that area for use, contemporary use, not as an archaeological site that you put a cap on and never touch again, but for contemporary use. A lot of those types of things were very important for him to understand too, the district ranger, so that common understanding that we had of each other's needs then could help us get forward. So that took a while. That definitely takes a while. Like, that doesn't happen overnight. Actually, we played a lot of golf. Maybe that's why he let me win. But we spent a lot of time together. We became pretty good friends. I'm friends with him and the other lady that came behind to this day. So we developed a pretty good relationship, constant communication. We talked regularly. We get together and formalize those. You heard Kevin talk about, and Darren, how much time they spend talking about the issue. When I was working for the tribe, we met with the Forest Service regularly, just so we could get that, just so we could get on the same page, have updates, have a common understanding, and that constant communication, because that was key. That was a key for us. So that's probably one of the things that I would say, being from the tribal side and recommending to folks is come to an understanding with your counterpart. Learn about each other. Learn about the needs of the Forest Service. Learn about the needs of the tribe. That will help you in how you move forward, because if you don't have that, you're going to be proposing something that the Forest Service can't implement. You're going to be proposing something that the Forest Service can't even look at for a couple of years. And so having understanding of that, maybe you'll gain a champion, and that's really part of the part of the beauty of the process. Not only on the Forest Service side, you gain a partner from the tribe. Gaining that champion is really a key piece for you, because from the Forest Service side of things, how many people have been rangers for longer than a year? Longer than 2 years? Longer than 3? 4? The hands start going down after a while, because my point was, they don't stay in those positions very long. Line officers tend to move a lot. And guess who the champion of the project was? That person who left, and that was the district ranger. And so, if the tribal person has, as much of the understanding so he can help the next person that comes in, and likewise on the tribal side, although I stayed there 25 years, tribal people change too. They do change out, and so that helps the kind of institutionalize the communication that you had, and the ability to move forward, a little foundation from there. So that really helps. That really helps out a lot. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, so Nolan, coming from initially from the tribal side and your work with ITC and the early envisioning of the Tribal Forest Protection Act, and I'm sure that you came to at that development process in your mind, you had in developing this, the role that you played, you were trying to solve and create a piece of an act that was going to be of assistance to tribes in ways that you envisioned, and you would, I'm sure that you did a lot to lay the groundwork for what you thought was going to be removing obstacles that you perceived were going to be obstacles, and putting it together. And now from the Forest Service side, understanding and envisioning what the obstacles are now that you, as you understand and looking from the Forest Service side, what do you see the obstacles now there? So combining those two things from what you, from the tribal side, what you thought were the obstacles, how the bill was developed, and then now looking back at the history so far,
What can you tell us about what you've learned about what remains as the biggest obstacle that you see now to full implementation and use of this authority?
That's a really good question. Obviously, some of them popped up here earlier, and some of the questions that came up from the audience when Brian and Sonia were talking. One of the challenges, and I'll call them challenges. One of those are the way that the tribes were defined, and the way that the types of projects where you can put those on the ground in terms of the authority that the Forest Service has. So the Forest Service doesn't have all the authority in their back pocket to be able to go out to every piece of ground at the moment, because the bill that was the final piece of legislation wasn't inclusive enough. And I liken it to the discussion earlier about treaty tribes. There's no treaty tribes in California. And so part of the other parts that was talked about earlier, it doesn't reach that far. Now, it doesn't even get to a point where it talks about Aboriginal territories. And so those things are that make it a challenge. They're not, I wouldn't say an obstacle, they make it more of a challenge, because obviously we're working on something up in your neck of the woods, and we're moving beyond that. But those are definitely challenges. And I say that because as a federal line officer, I would like no more than to have a cookbook of guidelines in front of me. That way, if I mess something up or don't want to mess something up, I would follow that cookbook. Well, we live in a different day and age, and we are hiring diversity of thought. We're hiring different folks in the Forest Service now. We're changing our culture, and we need to be in that boat. So I call it a challenge, not an obstacle. It's a challenge for me to take a risk as a line officer, that just because it doesn't exactly explicitly state that, then I have to take a risk. So that's an understanding that a line officer gets to a point where, well, I don't really want to take that risk because it doesn't say it in black and white. Well, we're hiring people with the diversity of thought, and we're hiring people from outside the agency that come in. I'm obviously a product of that. And so my thought process is a little different. I like to get things done, and figuring out a way to get them done, being creative, innovative. I think that's probably the way to address that challenge. Now, as far as from the tribal side of what we look to do, there was a short window of opportunity there, and the senators from California in 2003 were taking advantage and riding this wave because of the large fires that happened in Southern Cal. So they were enormous, and they burned up a lot of property and other stuff of value to a lot of Southern California. And there was a huge push to do something. And so in 2003, those two senators got together, and they had a lot of support. And so we tried to get something as written as clearly as it could. And when you're in that mode where you try to move fast like that, you miss things. And so yeah, from that standpoint, there was some key things in there about protection of the, I think it said cultural interests and that sort of stuff. You can interpret that a lot of different ways. And if it's my interpretation or your interpretation, if we can come to some understanding, we could probably get some stuff done. If you're from that rigid sort of standpoint of, well, it's not written in the rules, that's where you bump into some issues. But if you can make it past that, you probably can do a lot more success on the ground. It's a matter of figuring out a way to do it and not use the rules to say, I can't do this because the rules don't say so, or it doesn't explicitly say it. So hopefully that kind of addresses a little bit of that. Your question, Leaf.
So we're going to take one more question from Dirk, and then we're going to move on to our next presenter. Nolan will be here.
Actually, you know what happened on Sunday? My daughter's softball team got into the playoffs, and so they play about an hour and a half, 2 hours away at 4. And so as soon as I'm done, I'm going to go over there. But I'll be back tomorrow and Thursday.
We don't have it this afternoon, but we do have it tomorrow and Thursday. Family first. Dirk.
Priorities. That's right. One thing that I was listening to Nolan's presentation about knowing the Forest Service and vice versa, Forest Service knowing the tribe, is that That's where we have a liaison, tribal relations program manager out there making those contacts for you. They could be a big help. You know, as soon as I find out about an election or change in council members or somebody passing away or a Forest Service employee, staff member moving on, then it's up to me to inform the district ranger about, hey, we got some major changes here, you know, different players. But also to make sure that the tribal community knows about, now this is, let me give them as much as I can to try to educate them about, this is the Forest Service. Come with me, I'll take you to district office or the supervisor's office. And on the way over there, let me show you the fire engines and where the hot shots are out there. I know the forest like the back of my hand, but also know Indian country. I know what not get lost out there. You know, the shortcuts and the viewpoints. And I think that having a 360-degree viewpoint matters a lot when you bring out a new environmental director or a Forest Service employee. Drive them up to the point and then tell them, look, this is the land of the Hokomamon. And you know, you look to the south, that's the land of the Wobunich Entovich people. Up and over, that's the trails leading to the Paiutes. And you know, to the west is Choinumbi people. They don't know that, but you know, take the Forest Service map, orient it, you know, due north, and just explain like that. It makes a difference. For no one, you know, it matters because there's boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries, you know. At this point, on this ridge over, that's state land, that's private land, and you know, and you can give them the history of while you're at it. You know, that's again good points. Nolan. It helps to build a good project like that when you have all that background information. Because remember, this person just came out of the Navy. They have no idea. They could tell us about maybe Okinawa and Japan and everything, but welcome to the Sierra National Forest, and I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, Nolan. Good luck to your daughter on her game.